Hi Cam, how's it going?
Hey, oh, good, good.
And so
So
Cam and
what?
I are
Yeah, go ahead,
neither one
Jay.
of us, I believe, are experts, but Cam is very well read and researched on the topic. So basically, compound tirzepatide is coming from 503A and 503B pharmacies, and they are able to produce these medications because they were on the FDA shortage list, right? Now, 503A and 503B pharmacies, I believe, have different requirements of when they have to stop production of the medication
Correct.
um, after the shortage ends. And I believe Cam can speak more to that.
Yes. So really quick, let me just put it out here. I'm not with the FDA. I don't work in that field at all. I'm just someone like I've read a lot of regulation. I come from a military background. One thing about regulation is you can add to it, but you can't take away from it, right? So really, this is just research. If anyone has any questions or wants to fact check or wants me to send them where I'm getting this from, everything I'm pulling is right from the FDA website and the FDA article. And so what they have is a guidance, and the guidance they have it for 503A and 503B, and the title of it is called Compounded Drug Products that are essentially copies of approved products under the Section 503A and 503B of the Federal Food. I don't want to keep saying the DRUG. I don't want to get you flagged. Food, D Word, and Cosmetic Act. Okay, so essentially what that is it's regulation that says what you can and cannot do for commercially available copies of a product. So the main thing here, of course, the document gets into when you can compound and when you can't compound, and it talks about shortages. Now, in terms of a shortage, the FDA has declared they want the 503A and B pharmacies to get involved. There's a whole history behind this, but I don't want to bore y'all with the history lesson. It also plays into the New England compound pharmacy crisis that happened because there really were no 503A and 503B before the New England Compound Center. But that incident happened, and then that's when we spun out of 503A and 503Bs. Now, really quick, the difference between 503A and 503Bs, right? I'm gonna start with 503Bs. 503B pharmacies are pharmacies that are allowed to make in bulk. They are allowed to make in mass produce. And the reason is for that is because they have to follow a more strict set of regulations and quality control standards that they have to follow because it is known that they are producing in bulk. They have to follow what's called CGMP, right? And so they also have to register with the FDA. They have a lot more scrutiny. They're also the ones that, supply out to hospitals, doctors, doctors' offices, et cetera, et cetera. And they're the ones that they don't have to have a patient prescription for ahead of time. They can supply that doctor or that hospital or whatever it is in bulk without a one-to-one prescription. Big difference. The 503A pharmacies, they were never meant to produce in bulk, nor are they technically allowed to. They are supposed to have a script per patient. They are only supposed to fill prescriptions once a prescription from a doctor has been sent to them. Now, the reason for this, a little bit of history, is because after the New England Compound Center crisis, where a bunch of people got sick and some people were unalived because they were compounding injectables. Go Google it. It's a crazy story. There's some crazy similarities. The FDA got involved and said, look, we got to shut this down. Y'all have to start regulating stuff. Everyone's going to have to follow these CGMP and best practices, et cetera, et cetera. The mom and pop pharmacies said, wait a minute, we're just mom and pop shops. We're not producing in bulk. So you can't require us to have the same strategic regimen of guidelines that you do for these compound pharmacies that are producing in mass. FDA pharmacy came back and said, okay, fine. So we will have a set of rules for the 503A and we'll have a set of rules for the 503B. And the rules for the 503B were more stringent because it was known that they are producing in bulk. Now, this was like 10 years ago, or maybe even longer than that by now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now let's talk about where we are now. COVID happened, telehealth happened, a bunch of stuff has been put into play. And now we're in a situation where the telehealth companies are licensed with majority 503A pharmacies. And that is how a lot of people have been getting their product. Now, let me say this. I am not against compounding. I understand that people need access to the medication. Do I think that there's certain safety concerns? That's really a whole nother topic, because I've done so much research on the New England Compound Center. There are some legit concerns there with the amount of product and patients these telehealths are getting on a week to week, and the fact that everyone's pretty much using the same compound pharmacies. But that's neither here nor there for this situation, right? So we got the 503As. That's what the majority of the telehealths are using. This is kind of how this works out, right? So you got patients, they go to the telehealth. Sometimes they have a meeting with their doctor, sometimes they don't, depending on your telehealth. That script gets sent to the 503A. The 503A runs the product, mails it to your house, okay? Everything's been fine and smooth. But the problem is, it is a compounded product that is a copy of a commercially patented product. And if we go back to the FDA regulation, you are only allowed to do that when the FDA has said that specific product is in shortage, unless you have a medical necessity that requires you to have the compounded instead of the name brand. Because let's think about it. Let's go back to what compounded is. And I've said this before. Most people ain't ever had a compounded medication in their entire lives. And the reason for that is because you've never needed a compound. Compounding has been around since the days of the apothecaries. We understand that. But a lot of times, if you need a medication, your doctor is just going to put you in for the name brand or the generic, which people get confused. We're not talking about generics. We're talking about the active pharmaceutical ingredient. Two separate things, right? So in that case, since we are talking about compound, there are certain rules. You have to have what is called a medical necessity. If the medication is not in shortage and you want a compounded medication, you have to have a medical necessity. This is the same process that you would get a compound medication in the first place, which is why most of y'all ain't never had no compound. You have to have a reason why you need this medication over the name brand. So what we're essentially talking about is I can't take Zepbound, Mounjaro, whatever, because the liquid that they use gives me hives, or you got to have something like that. I'm allergic to the pen, which I don't know how you're going to be allergic to the pen, but you got to be something like that, right? And not only that, it is so important that your physician documents that. Because if it's not on shortage and you're getting these scripts to the compound and you don't have a medical necessity and there's no FDA shortage, now somebody's getting in trouble because you're messing with a patent protected API, active pharmaceutical ingredient. And that is why I believe Eli Lilly has been pushing so hard to get this medication off shortage. They've been sending cease and desist letters to everybody. And that is because they know that per the FDA regulation and the rules, once the shortage is over for 503A, when that clock hits 6 o'clock, at 6:01, if you're still making product and pushing it out, then technically you are now creating an unapproved FDA product and you're selling it without an exemption, and you're creating patent infringement, which are two federal infringement, federal law felonies, whatever you want to call them, right? Now, with 503B pharmacies, they have a 60-day exception. The reason why 503B pharmacies have 60 days, let's go back, is because it was understood that they were producing in bulk. And so the FDA allowed them to have 60 days to close up shop. They didn't do that with the 503As because it was under an understanding that if you're a mom and pop shop, you don't need 60 days to stop making scripts because they're supposed to be one-to-one. It was never, if you really know the history behind this stuff, it's kind of crazy because the way that they're using the 503A exemption, it was actually never supposed to be used that way. And what's so unfortunate is you have people that are going to be coming after the FDA, and it's actually not the FDA's fault because they tried to set a standard in response to the New England Compounding Center incident. And their response was to create 503As and 503B pharmacies. But then people found a loophole with these telehealths and making a bunch of one-to-one prescriptions and using 503As, that a lot of people got access to the medication, which is great. But now you're going to get shut off because there's no regulation to cover you, because 503As were not really supposed to be utilized in this capacity. So did I lose anybody? I know.
No, you have not lost me.
Tell people how the Chevron case comes into play in all of this.
Oh, Lord Jesus. Okay, so let me get my words together here. And Jay, help me out here. Okay.
Yeah, so let's start with the basics. So in June of this year, there was a ruling by the Supreme Court of the United States related to the ability for executive, administrative, executive branch organizations such as the FDA to interpret the law, right? And so the Chevron decision is based around that, and how the law can be interpreted by executive branch organizations.
Correct. And so pretty much what it means is when the federal regulation, whether it's the FDA, the DEA, whichever three-letter organization you want to make, it really don't matter. But whenever they make regulation and it's not clear, like it's not clear cut what the right and left limits are, which they do that on purpose, I'll come back to that, it leaves it to where things can be interpreted one way versus another. And the reason why the regs are written like that is so that the expertise of that said field have the ability to make a final determination of how you see fit. So for example, when we talk about, the shortages, the reason why people are always confused about whether the shortages are over or if they're not is because it's not really a clear cut. Nobody has like a defined clear cut of, if you have this much product available, you're in shortage versus you're not in shortage. And it's not only the FDA, a lot of government regulation is purposely written that way because it allows the said expertise of that field to make a final determination. Okay. So we had the Chevron case. It was a specific case where there were like these voters that, challenged some stuff. And this one didn't even have to do with the FDA, I don't believe, but overturning it says that, hey, I don't agree with how the feds are determining this regulation. So I'm going to challenge you. And that, like before Chevron, when it wasn't overruled, you couldn't do that. It was the expertise of that field that got to make that decision for that specific situation. It being overturned means anybody can challenge it. So to kind of put it in perspective, because it doesn't really apply to this specific FDA situation, because pretty much the FDA is siding with Eli Lilly. Now, I think that if the FDA did not side with Eli Lilly would have came after them and throw the Chevron at them, because they've actually done that with a couple of other things. But they didn't have to use Chevron in this specific situation. A time where Eli Lilly did use Chevron is with their newer drug Retatrutide, because they want Retatrutide classified as a biologic. And if any of y'all have experience with biologics, specifically Humira, which is one of the most expensive, hardest medications to get, the thing with it being a biologic is if a medication is determined as a biologic, you cannot legally compound it ever. And
also, isn't it not also true when it comes to biologics that the patent is also longer for a biologic?
Yes, it's longer. And then the only way, there's never going to be a generic. There's no generics. They have what's called a biosimilar, and that's a whole other different thing. And so what ended up happening with that really quick was in order for it to be, okay, so the rule says if you have more than 41 protein amino acids, then it's considered a biologic. Tirzepatide hit 39, okay? So that one was under it. And with Retatrutide, they're claiming that it has 41. And there's like one specific amino acid or protein in there that the FDA and Eli Lilly are going back and forth on whether it qualifies as a protein to make it a biologic. So what Eli Lilly did is they're suing the FDA because they're saying Chevron's overruled. I have the right to sue you because I don't agree with the determination you're making to say Retatrutide is not a biologic. That's a better example of when Chevron gets used. FDA or Eli Lilly is throwing it around, but they're not throwing Chevron around in this case because they got the FDA to agree with them.
Dave Knapp from On the Pen asked, couldn't the compound pharmacies use Chevron?
Yes. So, and that's a theory I've had for a while, that we're going to see how this is going to play out. And I think I need to look it up. I think it's the Alliance Compound Pharmacy. I always get that acronym, Alliance. Let me look it up really quick. But yes, I think that may play out. Alliance for Pharmacy Compounding. That's the APC. Now, so there's been speculation that the APC could possibly come in and sue the FDA. Because once again, we get back into Chevron and they have the ability to challenge the FDA's stance on if compounding is over or not, because the rules are not clear. So it's going to be up to the APC or some other compound. And, it could be that the compound pharmacies, the 503As all come together and they put in a lawsuit against the FDA, because it's the FDA that's going to get caught in the middle. But now that Chevron is overturned, essentially anybody can come in and say, screw that, they're in shortage, we have the documentation to prove it, because the APC and those pharmacists, they are very touchy about their rights in compounding. They are very touchy. And if you do some research on it, then you will realize, like, when it comes to some certain pharmacists, they are all about protecting their rights to compounding. And once again, that goes back into the history of the federal DRUG word and Cosmetic Act. It's a whole history with that.
But my big question about any court case that the compounding pharmacies may bring is, will they actually have the standing to bring the case? Because are they the ones actually experiencing the harm, right? And that's that's my question, the legal question. And it may end up having to be a group of patients that bring that up. But I don't know. But it might be the pharmacies, might be patients. I don't know how that's going to have to play out. But this is a legal question for sure.
Or if it would make it to the courts before the new facility starts shipping out the medication and their supply chain is resolved.
Yeah, so that's the other thing. I don't know if a lot of people are tracking because everyone's looking at the plant in Indiana. I have it in my notes, but there's a plant that's going to be Eli Lilly has ready to start production at the beginning of this year. They have plants in, I want to say, North Carolina and Indiana. Like there are some things that Eli Lilly is doing on the background to where they are getting ready to ramp up production at the beginning of the year. One thing that, Dave Knapp said Wisconsin. Yeah, that probably is. I know that they have a plant that's going to be up at the beginning of the year. And even with their facilities that they're building, they have construction crews on day shift and night shift, which is, they have the money for it, right? And that's what people have to realize too with, and I know that Kim has mentioned this a lot, there are insurance companies dropping coverage left and right now, and it's only going to get worse. And that, once again, is going to play into Eli Lilly's hands. The CEO, I think his name is Dave Ricks, he said in one of his interviews, we're not even promoting right now. He was like, we're not even promoting, and the product is flying off the shelves. The one thing, in my opinion, you're not going to see Eli Lilly promoting. You're not going to see them fighting for coverage because they don't want to expand too quickly to get themselves put back on the shortage list. It doesn't make sense.
Right.
So, they're going to play this to their hands. It's just to do enough to control the market.
And I know the conversation a lot of the times gets dominated like, oh, we'll just add vitamin B6 to it or just add vitamin B12 to it and we're going to be fine. Could you maybe elaborate to why that's, what your opinions are on that?
Yeah, so I want to pull up the the documentation on that, and I'll look for it here in a second.
Do you have anything else on the Chevron that you wanted to ask her?
No, not regards to the Chevron. But to add to the Chevron, like this is absolutely major. This will likely go to court by someone challenging the shortage list, whether it's going to be, it's not going to be Eli Lilly. So it's going to be either the pharmacies or patients that are going to have to challenge it. But basically, the government does not want to go against Eli Lilly in interpreting the law at this point, because if they want to overturn Chevron, the executive branch, they have to pick the right case.
Yes.
And the case where they are basically providing medication for a disease that is currently viewed as a moral failing may not be the case they want to put their weight behind. We're likely looking at something like an Environmental Protection Agency case or something dealing with water or air where they push back on the Chevron decision, and I doubt that this is a case they want to fight hard against.
And the thing that people have to understand is that history repeats itself, and the argument that's going to be hard to make for this is the fact that the FDA has already proven they do not have the manpower to regulate these facilities when it comes to 503As. And you have these 503A pharmacies pushing so much product, and it's an injectable. And I'm telling you, if you do some research on the New England Compounding Center meningitis outbreak, you will see that the similarities between that situation and how things are going right now, the similarities are uncanny. And literally there was I think it was 60 Minutes or one of those episodes where they had people from the FDA saying, no, we can't verify that every medication that comes from a compound pharmacy is safe. And they were talking in response to injectables. And so I understand that people are going to want to fight for their telehealths and mainly the 503As to continue production. But the problem is, because 503As are state regulated, and it has even been documented that the states don't have the resources to really follow up on these compounding pharmacies and make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do. And because the FDA does not have the manpower to regulate all these 503A pharmacies, it leaves it up to the what if and until it happens again. History repeats itself, right? Because if something happens and somebody gets hurt with these injectables, these GLP-1s coming from a telehealth 503A, the FDA are going to be the ones in trouble, and they're going to have to answer for why they let another NECC meningitis, that was meningitis, but another NECC outbreak happen again. And they cannot do that. That is the point of 503Bs, because they have to go through more regulation in CGMP. But the telehealth didn't go that route because it is more time consuming. It's more expensive. There's so many more reasons why, right? And so that's why, to a certain extent, with the responsibility that the FDA has to protect people, they pretty much can't let telehealth and 503A companies produce in this mass that they have been doing, which is so unfortunate because it has allowed so many people access. But people say it, people hate to say it all the time, there is a certain level of danger within this that is not being talked about and not being addressed. And I get it, it's people have access, people's health is better than it is now, now than it was before. But there is another aspect to this of why it was never supposed to be utilized like this in the first place.
And Dave Knapp from On the Pen said Eli Lilly is fishing to find that one person.
Oh, most definitely.
I believe that.
Most definitely. I mean, some of the, and I won't say any specific telehealth names or anything specific, but some of the stuff that I've even seen are friends and family, like how they're able to get their product and then it comes in a vial and the instructions. Like I have a friend that got compound a week ago, and we had to call the compound pharmacy because the vial said 10 milligrams, but then they had never been on compound Tirzepatide. But then it was like, but you take this many units, but the units weren't clear to line up with the milligrams. And so it was just a mess. And I was like, we had to call the pharmacy. And, when you get into stuff like that, that somebody's going to end up getting hurt. And another thing that people kind of say a lot of times is, well, if I take 5 milligrams of compounded Tirzepatide, it's just as strong as the 10 milligrams of name brand. But people don't understand what they're saying. That's a problem. That means there's an inconsistency in how the medication is being produced at the pharmacy level. You're never supposed to have a compound that's twice the strength of the name brand you were previously on. You don't have that if you're doing it in bulk, because they test for the same the validity across the product. But that's what 503B pharmacies. When you have thousands of scripts coming in to a 503A and they're running back to back, it's a lot easier for mistakes to be made. It's a lot easier for the dose to be too low or too high. These are all things that people are saying in lives that people are catching. People are watching.
I think Candace asked a question about, can you just add another ingredient to
and I missed that
the
whole thing. I'm
compound,
so
right?
sorry.
No, you're good.
No, this is great.
I just want to circle back to that.
Yes, I actually have it pulled up.
Pass it off, right? So let's circle back to the history of compounding really quickly. Let me provide a little bit of color about how compounds are usually used, right? And why that question is being asked, right? So when a medication is patented and not on shortage, the only way that you can provide a compounded version is if you are, correct me if I'm wrong here, Cam, the only way you can really provide a compounded version of the medication is if there's a medical necessity. And that usually means that someone is allergic to some inactive ingredient or inert ingredient in the medication usually, or the formulation of the medication. And so you tweak the formulation, you change the inert ingredient, right?
Yes, and I can actually give you the quote. It says from the FDA reg right here, was a change made for an identified individual patient that produces a significant difference for that patient. Was a change made between the compounded drug and the comparable commercially available drug for an identified individual patient, and has a prescribing practitioner determined that the change produces a significant difference for that patient. That's only one section of it, but yes.
So those are two things you have to do, right? So you have to prove that for that individual patient that they need that change, and two, the prescriber has to put their name behind it for that individual patient, right?
Individual patient.
Right. And so my eyes have been down because I've been looking for this specific quote because I knew it was around somewhere, right? So this is from the Eli Lilly's most recent earnings call. I believe it's the most recent one, about compounding, right? Because they know, because the formulation for Zepbound and Mounjaro, it's technically a secret. We know the active ingredient, but the active ingredient, if someone's allergic to that, no amount of compounding would fix it, right?
And we know there's no preservative.
But they have to be allergic to one of the inert ingredients, which we don't technically know. That's part of the secret sauce of Mounjaro Zepbound, right? But this is what they said about that, right? Of course, compounding is a long-standing practice under the 503A provisions of FDA, which is meant to customize doses for individual patient needs that we don't. It's not clear to me medically what that would be for Tirzepatide. But I guess that's legal in a sense. It's the mass production that's concerning. And we don't see a lot that with our medicine, more with the other one. So what they're basically saying is they know the inert ingredients, and they're like, you aren't allergic to any of those inert ingredients, and you aren't going to be able to prove you are.
I want to read you guys this section as well. Let's see here. Section 503A is intended to protect patients from the public health risk of providing compounded drugs to patients whose medical needs could be met by commercially available drugs, and to protect the integrity and efficiency of the drug approval process. Under the statutory scheme, only very rarely should a compounded drug product that is essentially a copy of a commercially available product be offered to a patient. I mean, we conclude, therefore, that a product that is essentially a copy of a commercially available product that is compounded regularly or in inordinate amounts, if it is compounded more frequently, that it needs to address unanticipated emergency circumstances, or in more than small quantities needed to address unanticipated emergency circumstances. So essentially what that section is saying, that gets into a whole nother issue about it speaks a couple times about compounding in regular intervals or inordinate amounts. Once again, this is allowed under the exemption during a shortage, but all of this gets pulled once the shortage is no longer there.
Can you explain to people the caliber of who Eli Lilly's attorneys are?
Kirkland and Ellis.
Oh, I'll sit back.
Yeah, Kirkland and Ellis. So, Kirkland and Ellis, I've done limited research on them, but I know of them just because of who they are. They are a multi-billion-dollar law firm out of Chicago that is one of the biggest, most prestigious law firms in the world. I think they're like the top 10, top 15 law firms in the world. So they worked with Nike. Yep, they helped Epstein. They worked with Nike on the Jumpman logo. They were involved in the Toys R Us thing. If you Google them, and they have a Wikipedia, they're just not a I've said this before, if you get a cease and desist letter from them, then you've been living on the wrong side of life, and you should probably reevaluate your decisions immediately. That's just not a company or a law firm. Take Eli Lilly out of it. I just wouldn't want to be involved with Kirkland and Ellis in the first place. I don't even like saying their names too many times. It's like freaking Voldemort.
You see that stationery come through the mail, and you just like, no, I'm done.
No, just you need to reevaluate a lot of your life decisions at that point. I mean, and they don't lose.
Another question I saw come up a lot in the last few hours as this has been developing is that a lot of we've heard a lot of different advocates and market their own companies as 503A and 503B, and we're coming to find out that the pharmacies they're using are primarily 503A.
Actually, Candace, to help you out, I have the website right here up because I figured this would come up. It's the facilities registered as human med compounding outsourcing facilities under Section 503B. Because I said this earlier, if you're an actual 503B, you have to be registered within the FDA database. And I have the database pulled up here in front of me. So if anyone has any questions, I can just literally either give you the website or just type in here in the search bar. I will say a lot of these pharmacies I'm looking don't sound familiar, but, and maybe for whatever reason, your 503B, air quotes, pharmacy is not on here, but this is what because they're referred to as registered outsourcing facilities. And just to be clear, though, a lot of the 503B pharmacies, even if they're listed there, they have a 503A arm. And here's another section I just came across. This is another thing that they're going to have to argue. List number 8, and this is coming out of the 503A regulation. The licensed pharmacist or licensed physician does not compound regularly or in inordinate amounts any products that are essentially copies of commercially available products.